Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome an exceptional professional who has not just done a lot in the financial services industry, but has now become an entrepreneur, Mr. Shachindra Nath. Shachindra, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
Shachindra is the Chairman and Managing Director of UGRO Capital, a fintech startup focused on the SME credit gap. Over the last 3 decades, he's built diversified financial services, including insurance, asset management, lending in the capital market. So, Shachindra, let's first talk about UGRO Capital. Tell me about the scope of work that you do, because you're talking on the SME credit gap.
Yes, Ashutosh. So, as you rightly said, that I spent roughly around 2 decades in building diversified financial services. Everything except building a bank at a global scale. I built diversified financial services, but I always felt my father was a professor in BHU, which was my hometown, and he used to tell me that you don't do anything which is of value, because as a private sector employee, neither you're creating no impact. And all that always pained me. So when I decided to move on in life and become entrepreneur, I felt that I have to now, next decade or so, I have to do something which is really impactful. If you look at India, actually, because India lives in our towns, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 towns, and small businesses actually which is driving our country, both from economic growth perspective and also from employment perspective. We have roughly around 6.3 crore small businesses, which employs around 11 crore people, which means around 25 crore plus families. But the power for them to grow depends upon the credit. And the availability of the credit is so poor that, this continues to be a problem. A reported gap of SME financing in India is roughly around $600 billion.
Wow.
And that's why I felt that if God has given me some ability, then I should build something which can solve for this problem. And that was my thought process of creating an entity which is focused on small business financing. And UGRO is dedicated lender for small businesses.
So, I'm going to continue the conversation on the SME segment. You just gave the gap of $600 billion. And, to quote you, you said that the SME segment contributes about 30% of the GDP, and the capital gap in the sector is 650 billion. Help me understand what would be the implications if this gap was fully funded.
So I think this gap comes from our understanding of small businesses. You will appreciate that I give this very, this example. Let's think of 2 small businesses run by 2 different doctors. One is a dentist, another is an IVF clinic. When a lending institution go and meet with both of them, they don't really understand the difference between a dentist and an IVF clinic. And they will invariably, the underwriting or the credit officer would ask the same question, saying, sir, how many patient comes to you in your OPD every day? Because somewhere it is built in their psyche that more number of patient is more revenue and the better is the customer. Little realizing that 100 patient to a dentist clinic versus a 2 patient in IVF clinic is far more profitable because per customer revenue is high. But it is very difficult for mainline lender to understand that differentiation. So I call it that in a non-homogeneous sector, this homogeneous way of giving credit is the core of the problem. India's small businesses actually operate out of 180 sectors, of which roughly around 100,000 plus subsector or types of business operate. And that's where the gap is of not being able to understand the underlying customer. Second, historically, because small businesses have worked in what we call informal segment, understanding the cash flow for a small business have been very, very difficult. Because when you go and meet a small customer in 5 years prior and you say, what's your revenue? The customer would say, oh, that's all, in kacha. What's your expense? All in pakka. What's your margin? Please calculate. Then how do a lender lend that? And that is changing because I call the tripod of the data. While, most of the businesses don't like GST, they don't like demonetization, but the force effect of GST, the account aggregation, which is the digitization of banking and bureau, would take small business financing equal to consumer financing. Today, if you walk into a Chroma store, you can walk out with a financing done to you.
Okay.
You go to a Chroma store, you want to buy an AC, you'll get your financing, you'll put the AC machine in your car, you'll come back home. I can tell you that in 3 years' time, this is where the MSME financing would be. Wow. At the point where a small business would want money, he would get money on tap, because the power of data is now emerging in a very, very big way.
I agree. And, as a finance guru, what would happen to the GDP of the country if the SME sector suddenly gets so much more cash?
Yeah, I won't say I'm a finance guru. Actually, by profession, I'm a lawyer. So, it's just destiny that I have got into finance. I still don't think so that I understand it very well. But I can tell you that, a country with average age below 30, a country which most of the people live not in top 9 metros, only the small businesses can drive our economic growth.
Correct.
For this country to survive and to maintain the social, or to prevent the social unrest, you have to provide employment. And the SME contribution to GDP has grown from 30% to roughly around 45%, which will immediately increase the employment from 11 crore to 25 odd crore, which means roughly around 50% of Indian population or lives would get positively impacted.
Amazing.
And if that happens, you can think of that it has an impact of at least 300 basis point in our GDP acceleration. That's one. Second, what is more important is that, it would create a momentum which would be uncontrolled, which I call animal spread. Now, question is how fast we can accelerate the credit availability. That is still all a challenge. You see, entities like UGRO are just a drop in an ocean. We need at least 100 more UGROs to come into the marketplace, who have to collaborate with large banks and financial institutions to then unleash the availability of credit for small businesses. It is happening. In my 30 years of experience, the kind of force and the trend I am seeing, I've never seen before. So I think that's a good thing which is happening right now.
Fabulous. But the converse side of lending is the risk. What will be the enhanced risk if so much money goes out into the SME space?
So risk, Ashutosh, is a function of two things. Businesses not being able to grow, succeed, survive, and that's why they can't pay. And second is intentional. I can tell you, between the large corporate, and this is some of my personal experience, when a large corporate or a mid-sized corporate take a loan, in India, they presume whether they pay back or don't pay back, it doesn't affect anyone's life. It's a risk which is in the hand of the bank or the financial institution. For a small business, the entrepreneur, when he fails, his life gets completely demolished. So that's why the intentional fraud or the intentional not paying the money is very, very low. What is need to be assessed of ability of the customer to pay you back. And that's where, India's SME financing is moving to what we call cash flow based financing. A cash flow way. So we built, for example, recently we built for Government of India on their government e-marketplace called GEM, a financing platform called GEM Sahai, along with iSpirit, which has gone live, which is hosted with us. Indian Railways, think of it, Indian Railways giving a 5 lakh rupees order to buy stationery to a small vendor. Now, a small vendor needs 3 lakh rupees to buy that stationery, print it, and give it back to Indian Railways. If the vendor has for last 10 times delivered that stationery in time, and if at the point of ordering you can finance him, and if he delivers, then if Indian Railways pay lender back directly, then there is hardly any risk. So as we are moving into what we call from entity level financing to transaction level financing, wherein you're not financing the SME as an entity, you're financing his transaction. Right. And once we keep doing that, the perceived risk would keep reducing. And that's where, you'll see the credit expansion happening.
This is a very important point you have just made. I was speaking to some other people who are in the microfinance business. And they were also saying that if you give 10,000 rupees or 15,000 rupees to an individual, that money will 99.9% come back.
Absolutely.
So I guess the psychological bent of returning everything is the same in small, medium enterprises.
I call it social and moral obligation than anything else. In our country, think of this in a tier 3 town, a small shop owner, which is in a bazaar, and wherein 5 more shop owners are there, and wherein a recovery guy reaches to a shop owner saying, sir, you have not paid the money. The stigma of that is so high that he will do anything and everything to make sure that that doesn't happen. Similarly, think of a 10,000 crore corporate, right? When he defaults, he doesn't care actually. He will take a flight and go and sit in where all
Other
they
country,
go, right?
Yeah.
But that poor small business doesn't have that optionality available to him. And this is what exactly happened for microfinance. 15 years back, everyone said, how can we lend to a woman who's selling vegetables? No, she's not credit worthy. But what they don't realize that woman, 3 children of his, husband being a drunkard, she would not default because her life is dependent upon that.
Correct. Very well said. So my next question to you, Shachindra, is that you must have done a lot of work with SMEs. What are some of the basic mistakes a lot of the SME entrepreneurs make?
Yes, I keep saying that the problem is not one; it's a both side problem. See, as generally small businesses, and we are all used to this, small businesses have always believed that if the margin in the business is 10%, they have an ability to generate extra 30% margin, but just not paying tax, right? And that drives the behavior. How can I do business wherein I don't have to pay tax so that I can make more money? And what is I call the informal segment to being a formal segment. What is now they are learning that by being in formal segment and probably paying that 30% tax, your 10% can become equal to 40 or 50 or 60%, because once you are in formal segment, then your ability, or what we call the bankability, becomes much higher. So I tell this to every small business: don't desist GST. Don't digest tax, because anyway now the ecosystem has been built that either today or tomorrow you will be caught. It's
Correct.
very difficult to avoid this, right? So you are better off to be in that system and rather make your business much more viable. Second is digitization, and with digitization doesn't mean that every small business has to make some glamorous website. When you can go and buy things on Amazon and pay by card, for business also you should be able to do that. I'll give you an example. When the pandemic hit, we said we'll go 100% digital, which means all KYC we'll do through video KYC. What that requires, that your mobile number should be linked to Aadhaar. In the first 3 months, we realized 60% of our new customers had not linked their mobile to their Aadhaar. Wow. Now that is simple issue of awareness. Digitization is part of life. Every small business has to be digitally available to lending institution and to their customers. And if they don't do that, then the survival is very difficult.
Amazing. So I'm now going to get back to UGRO. And, you raised about 1,000 crores capital when you started this, which is one of the largest for an NBFC. Share with me, what were your challenges and what were your learnings when you raised such a large amount of money?
A simple challenge: I pitched to 120 investors and only I could attract only 5 of them.
Absolutely. And endless flights, I'm sure, and endless hotels.
Yeah. And more so, I think so is, the biggest challenge of the risk of failing. Ashutosh, when you work as an employee for 25 years, when you see a fixed cash flow coming every month, and once you have to leave all of that and spend 3 years or 2.5 years trying to do something like this, it is very unnerving. Because as you know, raising capital, every day you feel you are there, and then next day morning you feel you're not there. So to hold your guard and have faith and commitment to yourself and about your idea was the most difficult part. And I'm not a young 28 years who doesn't have too much of risk in life. If it happens, it's okay. Otherwise, I'll go and do another job. A professional like me, when he moves into this territory, there is no looking back, because technically you become unemployable, because people think, oh, you failed in raising your capital, that's why you're coming back to the employment. So you need a lot of guts to do this. So that was the first. Second, in terms of the structure, because I wanted to create this capital structure in a listed vehicle, because I wanted our business to be built for perpetuity, because sometimes the private equity money means you are building business only for 4 years. I wanted to build the business for next 5 decades. So raising capital technically in a shell listed vehicle of this size and proportion was very challenging. But idea was powerful and persuasion required, and finally we were able to attract investors.
Yes, amazing. So now let's talk about the way UGRO works with some of the SMEs. As someone who gives money to them, what do you look for before you decide to fund?
So we don't look for anything, actually. So we say that the way we are trying to disrupt and solve for this problem is that we focus on select 8 sectors. So because if I have to solve the problem of looking an IVF clinic and a pharmacy or a dentist differently, then you have to deeply focus. So we focus on 8 sectors: healthcare, education, food processing, hospitality, light engineering, electrical equipment manufacturing, chemical, auto component, and micro enterprises, which are sector neutral. Within those 8, we look at 100 subsectors. Then we have designed a very deep data analytics platform and an underwriting framework. Our data analytics platform is dependent upon this complete tripod of what we call the bureau, which is give you a behavioral analysis. The GST would give you a revenue analysis, and banking cash flow, which gives you, ability to pay back. Actually, these 3 things can give you what we call the virtual profiling. You don't need to ask anything more for a small business customer. So we today are disbursing almost 250 crore a month, and it would continue to grow. But we don't ask for any other information from the customer. As long as these 3 come, our system can calculate. And then it's matter of distribution. Today, we have built a massive distribution. India still needs lending institution to have a very vast physical footprint. So we should be present in 250 plus location by mid of next year. So we have 4 defined channels. We do supply chain financing, machinery, productive asset, mortgage back, partnership, digital. So once you do that, you understand. So you'll understand the customer not by meeting him, but by looking at the data behind that. And that's our model.
Very interesting. And you are primarily debt. You don't look at equity at all.
No, sir.
Right.
No. So we are pure play lending institution.
So if tomorrow I come and take debt from you, how involved will you get with my business or in my own governance?
So, sir, when we look at SME, we look at customers with sub 5 turnover, right? A sub 5 crore turnover customer doesn't need equity and doesn't need, honestly, governance support, because it's an entrepreneur, family-driven businesses, right? So anyone who will try to improve that is a complete failure. So we don't look at it. What we look at is the health of the customer and his ability to keep paying, but not asking him, but keep looking at the data which is available from public sources. So we will every quarter his every customer's bureau would be done, is fetched. We will ask a refill of his GST data. We'll ask for a refill of his banking data, and we'll just make sure that business is in a good health. And if there is an early warning signal where we are looking that their customer is stressed, there is a physical intervention to go and ask the customer what is the problem and how we can solve for that. That's our approach.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So, Shachindra, I'm now going to move to the next segment of our conversation. Our viewers and listeners love to get to know my guest a little better. So, a few questions for you personally.
Sure.
My first question is that in such an amazing career, which has had its own sets of ups and downs, what would you say are 3 key milestones or pivot points in your life or your career?
It's a very difficult question.
Okay.
I think the first and foremost, first pivot was that, when you are young and when you are studying and what you are doing, ultimately have no relevance of what you'll do, in your life.
Correct.
I was a trained, legal professional. I was a gold medalist in law. My father wanted me to, he felt that I should make a very great lawyer. But I ended up doing financial services, very complex things. So the, so first pivot was that I remember in 99 when I moved to Delhi and practiced law for 1 year. And all of a sudden I realized that law is like playing a game of cricket. And in a game of cricket, for your ability to make it to the national team is 1 out of million.
Correct.
If you play a kabaddi or a kho-kho, you can get to national team very fast. So I said that I would rather play a kabaddi and kho-kho and be in the national team rather than play cricket. So that's the first pivot I made. I said, doesn't matter what I have studied. What is God is giving me the opportunity wherein I have the confidence that I will succeed, I will do that.
Wonderful.
That was the very first pivot. And I keep telling this to young people, don't get hardened of what you want to do too early in life. Second pivot was or learning, which was that sometimes you have to draw a line and decide what is good and ethical, and you have to avoid the company of people which your heart and mind doesn't allow you to do.
Well,
And that's where when I decided to draw a line for myself at a risk of losing everything, having no career, no job, I decided to walk out on the road and do something of my own. And that's the second pivot, because it needs courage, but if you are confident, you should be able to do it. And third and the last, when you move into position what I am today, then you have to remain very, very focused. Every time I come and people say, oh, what next for you? And I ask them, what do you mean by what next? No, you have done asset management, you have done insurance, you have done wealth management, so you must be thinking of more. And I keep telling them, God has given you only one life. If I create UGRO as an institution in next year, 10 years, that itself is, a great milestone. Why should I do more? So to, control the aspiration and rather deliver an impact is the third pivot I decided to do in my life.
Fabulous. So I have time for two more questions for you. My next question is, who or what inspires you to keep doing so many wonderful things?
Oh, my wife, actually. Yeah. So, my wife is more educated than me. She's brilliant. And very early in when we got married, so I told her that you're so educated, you're a doctorate, you should go and do job. And when she looked at, she waited for a few months and she said, no, given that you are work like a madman, I would commit myself to my children and my family and I'll not do anything. And to me, that was a big surprise, that how come somebody who has spent 23 years in a hostel, have been so well educated, can have the courage to leave everything and dedicate to home. And the beauty is that today both of our children are doing so well. They are on their own. But that always encourages me, somebody's ability to sacrifice almost everything and commit to a completely different thing. And obviously now she has the time and luxury and she's becoming an entrepreneur herself. So that not only her, but all such females who have, in a country like India, who can put their male counterpart first, is an amazing thing. Amazing. And that's what West doesn't have. And that's why there is so much of disruption and dissonance is there. So all, all those females who can do that are a matter of inspiration for me. And obviously my father, because, my father was a Ford scholar. He was postgrad and doctorate from both US and UK. But after that, he decided to come back to his hometown in the city of Banaras and dedicated 47 years to his university, only for one reason, because the university gave him scholarship to go to US and he wanted to give it back. And I used to tell him, how many years you will keep giving back? He said, all my life. So that's a matter of inspiration for me.
Amazing. Amazing. And my last question to you, what would your advice be to young managers who are starting off on her or his career in the corporate world or as an entrepreneur?
I tell this to my daughter, and I tell this to every young person. Nothing happens in a span of 3 or 5 years. Please, when you are passing out and when you're taking the first job, think of what you would be in 10 years or 15 years.
Right.
Which means that the first few years you have to be very stable. Every resume I see in the first 5 years, there are 10 jobs which are changed. I said, doesn't matter what you are doing. I remember in my first job, my boss used to throw paper on my face because I used to not, staple it properly. But even if that kind of a menial job, you can do it well, you will be able to run large organization. Be stable in the first 10 years of your career is the most important thing to my mind, which is completely missing today.
Very, very interesting. Shachindra, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for telling me so much about UGRO Capital. And, I've learned so many new things from you today in our conversation. Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thanks for calling me for brand called you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.